Roger. Angels now 11. Steady up.
Close out. Warning yellow. Weapons hold. I repeat. Warning yellow. Weapons hold. Alpha Bravo out. Roger.
Okay.
Gypsies. Pass up. Bravo directs. Warning yellow. Weapons hold.
35 miles here.
Thank you all for coming out this afternoon. I know it's going to be a busy weekend with the Cardinals, I think, playing, and then we've got the big reunion with the class of '61 at Muncie Central, which I don't belong to, but I came in anyway for the weekend. The ending on this film as a torchbearer member of the Tuskegee Airmen organization. I'm a younger generation pilot whose career stands on the shoulders of what they accomplished in the 40s when folks didn't believe that we as African Americans could fly airplanes and do the same job that other parts of our society were doing. And it always moves me to know what they went through to achieve what they did. It was hard enough going through pilot training when I went through in 1966. There were still pockets of resistance to the notion that black people could fly airplanes. But they cracked the door open and established in the minds of Americans, both black and white, that yes, we could do it. But let's go back to my beginnings and look at this question here: what's using your life? What's using your life? I ask that question because many times when I talk to audiences, if we think back on it, something happened to all of us a long time ago in our childhood. And some of what happened to us was good, and some of what happened to us was maybe not so good. And oftentimes it's the bad stuff that happened to us in childhood that ends up running our lives. In other words, giving us something that we feel like we need to prove. Sometimes paying the cost for the choices that we make out of the neediness and insecurity that we have that started in our childhood. And for me, Brian Settles, the greatest blessing that I had was Bernice Settles, who came to that Nebraska orphanage when I was 3 years old and adopted me and brought me back to Muncie, Indiana. I was amazed over the years at how many people I've talked to about what my beginnings were, and they were surprised to know that I was adopted. But the story on Brian Settles was that I was given away to the Lincoln State Orphanage when I was 7 days old because it wasn't too popular to keep biracial babies looking like me in Nebraska during the 40s. So I was deposited in the orphanage, came back to Muncie, lived over on 720 South Vine Street, where I was pretty much the lightest thing running around the neighborhood and trying to get over the best that I could. But oftentimes in life, we have to be aware that our internal conversation speaks to us in a louder voice than the external world. And even though Mama Settles gave me all the love that any child could ever want, my conversation internally was that I'm not good enough because I'm half white. And if you look back at that time in America, I mean, this was just a few years beyond the Tuskegee Airmen, when Jim Crow America was alive and well. By the time the late 40s and early 50s came around, we were starting to slowly advance as a society and begin to tackle the segregation and the obstacles to progress for black Americans. But nevertheless, growing up on the streets of Muncie, I had a neediness to always be accepted. And I was probably accepted, but my conversation was because I'm so light and I look white, I'm not good enough. And then when you have a father, adopted father, that looks like he could be Shaquille O'Neal's brother, you got some serious credibility problems out on the playground, which led me into the house, and I have in chapter 2, Slings and Arrows, where Mama Settles told me the awful truth about my beginnings. Because the children on the playground, being capable of immense amounts of cruelty, were saying things to me like, they're lying to you in that house, is that your daddy? Nobody that dark can have no baby looking like you. And so naturally I confronted Mama about it one day, and then I say, learn the awful truth. So the thing is, I'm out here operating in the neighborhood, trying to get over the best that I can, having a mother that's instilling reading values, because she was a librarian, doing your homework and doing it correctly. And but early on, I latched on to sports as being my real way to get over. And I, at a young age of 12 or 13, said, you know, if I can become unstoppable on the basketball court, or if I can catch a football and it take a half a dozen people to bring me down, that's going to take attention off of my whiteness and put it on Brian Sellers, a bad dude, man. We want him on our team, right? And so at an early age, my dream was to become a Muncie Central Bearcat. We talk about role models and how important it is mentoring our young people. You have to have a dream to work into that gives you a reason to get out of bed and to have a purpose in your life. And for me, becoming a Bearcat was it, because I respected and admired the varsity players. One of them was my mentor, who babysat for me, Jim Sullivan. Most of you don't remember Jim Sullivan, but he took me under his wing and told me that if I kept making my grades and kept playing ball, it was going to work out. So now I've got this obsession that I'm going to be a Muncie Central Bearcat. I'm going to get me an athletic scholarship, and I'm going to college on a basketball or a football scholarship, whichever one I chose. And that's where my career was headed until my junior year at Muncie Central, when I sustained a double medial collateral tear in my junior year, and then was the victim of a hazing scandal my senior year, halfway through the year, that resulted in me and another starter being kicked off the team for participating in a history of behind-the-scenes hazing that went on with upperclassmen and young people. I still think that the race played a part in it, because players have been getting hazed at Muncie Central for years and years and years, and finally there was this one father, a white father, who found out that his son had been subjected to this harassment and said, I want the niggas kicked off the basketball team, or I'm prosecuting the school because y'all have tacitly approved this thing. And so we got sold down the river, and all of a sudden now I've got half of a junior season, which I didn't play, leading scorer on the team, right, just ahead of Bill Dinwiddie. Most of you know Bill Dinwiddie. And then my senior year, halfway through the year, kicked off the team. Well, doors in all of our lives slam shut. And then we have to look for what's the next door. And an amazing thing happened. My scholarship to the University of Colorado fell through at the last minute. And my mother said, don't be a fool going to some of those Southwest schools that got Mickey Mouse curriculums. You won't get a good education when you've got this great institution out here at Ball State where you can get a great education. So don't be a fool like your daddy chasing that ball and end up with a inferior education. So just like that, I registered late for Ball State, and who should I run into in the hallway? And I describe it in the book. James J. Winters, who was the athletic equipment manager at Muncie Central for all of the sports teams. And I ran into him in the hallway outside the registrar's office. He says, B, man, you gonna go to Ball State? And yeah, man, I'm registering to go to Ball State. He said, well, you gotta be on the drill team. I said, drill team? He said, yeah, man, it's gonna be a blast. You'll love it. You gotta be on the drill team. We're gonna drink beer, chase co-eds, and participate in drill competition. And a couple of those items sounded, pretty decent to me. So I said, drill team, man. I said, how do you sign up for the drill team? He said, you gotta sign up for ROTC. I said, Air Force ROTC? He said, yeah. I said, well, do you have to wear a uniform? He said, well, only once a week. I don't know, man. I don't know what I can deal with this Air Force ROTC. So reluctantly, I go and sign on the dotted line to join ROTC to be on the drill team. They have fun and games with the, boys will be boys type deal. And two things happened on the drill team. One thing that's very important for us as grandmothers or as mothers is that your children are who they run around with. And all of a sudden on that drill team, two amazing things happened. One is all the drill team members got promoted ahead of everybody else in ROTC. The number two thing was 2/3 of the drill team members wanted to be Air Force pilots. Now you got B. Settles, who's got this neediness about always being up in front, you know, being the star, being the basketball team, football team, lost that, and all of a sudden now pilot. Wow, people that fly are really admired and looked upon with a lot of respect. But flying, I don't know. So all of a sudden I end up, I'm already a pilot before I realized I wanted to be one. And I chose to fly airplanes for the wrong reason, which is another reason why we have to be careful in our lives about the choices that we make that we don't own, or that we pay a cost that we didn't know we was going to have to pay for the choice. And I chose to fly airplanes, lost the basketball uniform, lost the football uniform, but I replaced that with a pilot's uniform to look good. And how many of you saw the movie Top Gun with Val Kilmer and Tom Cruise? Believe me, with those cats walking down the flight line with those helmets and those Air Force shades and those tight G suits, you can't look any better than that. And so just like that, I'm off to Air Force pilot training on the adventure of a life. Little old biracial baby from the streets of Muncie, Indiana, gonna go off and try to be a pilot. I mean, I was afraid to get on the roof to fix the leaks in our roof. Mama would make me climb up the ladder, and now I'm going off to be a pilot. Mama was not sure about the choice I was making. Because her feeling was that air travel should be relegated to emergency travel only. And you don't volunteer to fly airplanes when you don't have to. I'm off to pilot training, and then this is where the neediness, again, and what's using your life, the insecurity, always having to do something to bolster my sense of adequacy. When we finished pilot training in 1967, the Vietnam War was really heating up. They were starting to lose hundreds of pilots and thousands of ground infantry waging that war. And as I finished pilot training, my wife at the time, we talked about that I wasn't going to volunteer for an airplane assignment that was going to send me to Vietnam. I was going to give me a safe assignment flying transports here in the United States, or air-to-air refueling tankers, and wasn't going to deal with exposing myself to Vietnam. The F-4 Phantom was the airplane, fighter jet that was doing most of the bombing in Vietnam in the 66, 67, 68, 69, 70 period. Hundreds and hundreds of assignments were available in the F-4. I had at the bottom of my list, again, serendipity, these chance encounters that alter the direction that you're taking in your life. And suddenly I run in again on the steps going in to turn in my paperwork for my assignment that's going to give me a safe assignment in the United States, like I discussed with my wife. And I run into my basketball buddy at Laredo, Lurch Lindsay, 6'3", 225-pound tight end from Florida State University. And he said, "Big B, man," he said, "you got your paperwork ready to turn in?" He said, "I know you got that F-4 first." I said, "No, man, the wife and I discussed it, you know, and I'm passing on the F-4. He said, "You know you want to fly fighters?" He said, "If you don't fly fighters now, you'll never be able to get out of MAC or SAC and get into fighters. But if you get into fighters now, if you don't like it or if you want to transfer, you can get out easier than you can get in." He said, "You know you want to wear that G-suit and fly the fighter." So B. Settles changes his selection to the F-4 Phantom. Again, looking good, right? And then I deal with paying the cost. Paying the cost of looking good. I already had reservations about the war just from the political education that I had at Ball State and knowing what was developing. John Kennedy was killed when I was a sophomore at Ball State. And then when I was in the last classes of my F-4 training, Dr. King was assassinated while I was over at the fraternity brother's house having dinner. And as you recall the history on it, Dr. King in 1967 delivered his Riverside Church speech. in which he denounced the Vietnam War as immoral and politically improper. I hated when he did that, not so much because his position was right or wrong, but that he had millions of people hating him in the United States at the time that he was leading the civil rights movement forward. But now when he went into another area and came out against the war, millions of people felt that he was really stoking the flames of dissension, and he was really becoming too powerful of an influence. I don't want to get into why he was killed or, you know, who killed him. But the point is, as a young fighter pilot getting ready to go to Vietnam, when the icon of the civil rights movement had said that there shouldn't be any dying going on and killing of the Vietnamese, I had a heavy burden on me that I was selling out on the movement here at home and going in my own folly, based on what was using me, looking good, to go and hang out in Vietnam for a year, unsure of what my real feelings about the war were. So that begins to be the essence of the book, No Reason for Dying. It has a double meaning. Trying to prove to your neighborhood bullies that you're a badder dude, braver dude than they are. There's no reason for dying, but our young men are dying every day in the streets of America, trying to prove that they're badder than somebody else or not going to let anyone disrespect them, right? So I thank God that I had Mama Settles to give me that foundation in academics, and that I had a little bit of athletic ability that gave me a sense of wanting to achieve. And aviation was just another level, but the book deals with having to go to Vietnam and shooting craps with my life was something that I didn't believe in. And that was the agony of the experience of Vietnam. So the book is basically, the stage setting is the 199 combat missions, but I deal with paying the cost of looking good. And many of my readers have said that they've been able to relate to the struggle that I went through in struggles that they've had in their lives, of course, with different issues. Another issue that I dealt with in the book is that I was a newlywed at the time that I went to Vietnam. I'd been married 1 year, and parenthetically I say that this would have been a far different book had I written it fresh from Vietnam. But life got in the way for almost 30 years before I finally started to realize that tomorrow's not promised, that we have to live in the moment, live intentionally based on what we say we're up to. And I always fancied myself as a writer and a poet, and when a girlfriend of mine died of cancer at age 37, that really brought home the message in 1995 that you're full of it unless you get started writing this story. So when I was driving the cab in Buckhead after Eastern Airlines had failed, I started writing the story, but I had the benefit of years and years of introspection, evolution, transformation, and life experience and philosophy development to be able to have a sharper, clearer perception of what my life had been about and who I was in Vietnam. And one of the things that I had to deal with is that I was embarrassed at my double standard when it came to faithfulness in my marriage. My wife pointed this out to me that that a lot of us had poor role models in terms of the value of committed relationship. And I did not realize that Howard Settles, Keg, you might remember, some of you who remember back then, Keg Settles, he left home because he wanted to have too many girlfriends for Mama's taste. And they broke up, and Mama, when I was 13 or 14 years old, would say, Brian, come here, this is 9 or 10 o'clock at night, Brian, come here, your father's circling the block. And we lived across the street, projects are no longer there, but we lived at the corner of First and Vine. She said, your father's circling the block, waiting on his husband to go to work. because he had the 11 o'clock shift at the factory. And at quarter to 11, the husband would leave, Daddy would park his car under the shade, the shadows of the trees, and go in, and he was seeing for years and years and years. I hope I'm not letting any terrible secrets out here. But the daddy's gone, so nobody can get him. But the thing is, you know, my father was a womanizer, but that was my role model. And there was someone else who was a role model for me here in Muncie. And I respected him. He taught me a lot about responsibility, being on time. He was a good Catholic, but he was a womanizer. Sip Jack Daniels on the job. But anyway, that was the standard for relationship. You have a good woman, but you know, you're always looking for another sweet pea on the side. And there in Vietnam, I've got a fighter pilot's mentality. Hey, I might be dead next week or tomorrow, so I'm going to live and drink and be married today. And if I get out of here alive, I'll get on my knees and ask for forgiveness. But Lord, don't ask me to be strong now. Not the kind of attitude you want to live your life with, but that's who I was at the time. But at the same time, the dudes would be homicidal or suicidal if they knew that their sweeties were doing the same thing that they were doing. So that double standard really outraged me and embarrassed me, and so I had to deal with my failure to keep my faithfulness. Now, digress a minute again. Mama Settles raised me in the church. We started off at Church of God in Christ at the corner of Kirby and Vine. The Reverend Reese, Joel Reese is the pastor. Started off there, and then we ended up on Bethel on Jackson. So I was raised with a love for the Lord in an early age. And then when I was at Muncie Central, discovered that we had a womanizing pastor who was busy chasing the single ladies around the pews while his wife was over in the parsonage next door. And I said, well, it looks like this thing might be up for grab. If our church leadership, you know, is hanging out in as much sinfulness as the people in the streets, then maybe I'm on my own. And I lost my Holy Spirit walk for many, many years as a result of disenchantment with that one pastor. And that's who I was in Vietnam, as I was somewhere between born again and agnostic, not really sure. And I behaved like it. I've got a chapter. I had a roommate in Vietnam who was a born-again, teetotaling Baptist from Tennessee. Great guy. I loved him like a brother, but most of our relationship was me intimidating him and rubbing his nose in my backsliding lifestyle. Drinking big whiskey in the room when he didn't like drinking in there, playing rhythm and blues on his stereo equipment, and we would have these constant debates about my lifestyle and my rationale. So the thing is I had to deal with the hypocrisy of the infidelity, and I'm not proud of some of the things that I did in the book, but it was who I was then, again, out of this sense of deprivation and neediness that I had to always be doing something that proved that I was more to myself. The reflection of years made this book a lot more introspective than it would have been. And many readers have said that they haven't read a book that is as honest as this book is about male ego and choices that we make as men and what drives us. And the situation that I was in when I was writing this book, I was in what would be called an insalubrious conjugal situation, bad marriage, stated simply. And I had almost a mania about getting the story told, because I didn't know whether I was going to live through the relationship that I was in. There was mental illness involved in it, and it wasn't so much mine, but the spouse's. And this is while I was flying airplanes for ATA Airlines, that's now defunct over there in Indianapolis. Passengers would be horrified to know what's going on in the private lives of the pilots that are flying their airplanes. But nevertheless, the commitment to professionalism and responsibility, I always flew a good airplane and got great reviews from my passengers, but I was in a terrible situation, and I was writing this book as if I would never write again, and I had to put all of my heart and guts and eyelashes on the pages of the book. And if you have an opportunity to read it, you'll see that it's raw, it's rude, and it's the real deal of what it was like being in that desperate situation in Vietnam, with thousands and thousands of Americans being killed, and me vicariously feeling the agony of our ground infantry who were in the trenches, who were in the rice paddies with the leeches and the mosquitoes and the madness. No ground infantry would ever buy a drink around me because of what they endured. The fighter pilots, we were like the country club way of fighting the war. We would go and fly our combat missions. Most of the time we would come back. Sometimes some of us wouldn't come back. Out of the 44 pilots that were in my unit, 44 pilots, we had 20 F-4s assigned to our squadron. And of the 44 that were in my unit during the year that I was there, 23 of them had to eject at one time or another. 23 out of 44. Of those 23, they recovered 6. So we actually lost 17 pilots and navigators out of 44. And the reality becomes surreal when you go on your combat mission, you fly your sortie, you get shot at, maybe you don't get shot at, maybe it's at night when you can see it. You come back with the picture of tracers coming at your airplane, locked into your memory forever. And then you go to maintenance debrief, tell maintenance what's wrong with the airplane, it needs to be corrected before the next flight. You go back to your air-conditioned room, you go to your air-conditioned room, pour yourself 2 or 3 fingers of gin or scotch, open your mail from the United States, turn on your stereo recorder that you bought in Hong Kong, read your mail, go take a hot shower, then go to the Officers Club, select a T-bone steak, a salad, a baked potato, a half a bottle of Chianti, and wait for the USO show to start. And then when you've gotten thoroughly bombed, you go back to your room, go to sleep, and try to show up for work the next day sober. And you do that for 365 days, and you either get to go home, or Laos or Vietnam was your permanent resting place. So that was the experience, and like I said, I didn't experience what our brothers at the Ia Drang Valley, or at Khe Sanh or Hamburger Hill experienced, where they were hearing the explosions, having their eardrums almost blown out with the concussions, standing in one spot and moving, and 5 seconds later a partner who came and got in the same spot is blown up by a rocket or a AK-47 round. It changes you forever. Surviving war changes you forever. You don't come back the same person, and a lot of us left a lot of ourselves over there. So my homage always goes to the Vietnam veterans who endured that war, and it seems like America maybe learned a little bit of its lesson from the Vietnam War in terms of the way we treat our veterans today. I mean, we know that they're involved in another quasi-controversial campaign in Iraq and Afghanistan, but at least when they come back, we embrace them and thank them for their service. But just applauding for them when they come through the terminal, to me, is not enough. We need to be writing our elected representatives and making sure that our veterans are being taken care of. Because when you've sacrificed a leg or an arm, lost an eye in the war, you should not have to be put off and given a runaround by the Veterans Administration to get your medical needs met. So I do urge you to support our veterans in that way. But I'm blessed to be here. I would not be standing here if it wasn't for Bernice Settles. And I sometimes wonder that had I never been injured in Muncie Central playing ball, I realized that I would have never been anywhere near an airplane. But that just shows you how your life changes can occur when events happen that close doors in your life. And now I'm a retired airline pilot, mentoring in the church, trying to save as many of our young men as I can who are coming up in fatherless homes, and knowing that it was those people in Muncie who put their arm around me and told me that I could do it that made the difference for me. But we don't have enough people that are putting their arms around our young men to let them know that you don't have to surrender to the streets. And I don't have to tell you about how much of the crisis that we have on the streets of America with the madness that's going on, and our children don't read. Brazil, India, and China are getting ready to take over the world with their economic growth, and we're playing Game Boys, and you know, nobody's reading, nobody's taking education seriously, and we're going to get, as a country, further and further and further behind. So I thank you for your attention, and I appreciate you being here, and I hope that you will take on reading this adventure story, because it has something historically significant to contribute to war literature because of the times that the story was written during the turbulent 60s with all the civil rights stuff and the anti-war movement. So I thank you, and if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer a question if anyone wants to ask me. Everybody already knows everything? Good deal.